The Arctic is opening, and global warming and geopolitics has everything to do with it. The new Arctic routing will be 40% faster.
It allows the Chinese and the Russians to skip the geopolitical hotspots in the Middle East. It also allows to bypass if they use the northern route. It also allows them to lessen their dependency on the Straits of Malacca, because these are choke points whereby the Americans actually have much strategic advantage over the trade routes because of the presence of their ally.
A massive container ship leaves China stacked with electric cars and solar panels and somehow shows up in Europe in barely 20 days instead of the usual 40 or 50. No, it did not teleport. It took a risky new path through the melting Arctic, a shortcut that slices thousands of kilometers off traditional routes like the Suez Canal. On paper, this looks like a trader's dream: less fuel, less time, less money, faster deliveries. But here's the twist. The very thing making this route possible is climate change, and this shortcut could quietly make that crisis even worse. So in this video, we're going to unpack how melting Arctic ice is opening this route, who is trying to use it, and why some experts think it is less a golden highway and more a loaded trap hiding in the fog. First, let's get everyone on the same map. When people talk about the Arctic shortcut, they usually mean two main routes. One is the Northern Sea route, which hugs the northern coast of Russia across the top of Siberia. The other is the Northwest Passage, which snakes through the islands of Arctic Canada. For centuries, explorers dreamed of these passages as a faster way to move between Europe and Asia. But thick, multi-year sea ice turned those dreams into shipwreck stories. They were cold, dangerous, and basically unusable for normal commerce. Over the last few decades, that has started to change. The Arctic has been warming much faster than the global average. The result is thinner, younger sea ice that melts back much farther during summer and early autumn. Less ice means more stretches of open water and more chances for ships to slip through. That is the brutal trade-off. Our warming planet is literally carving a new lane into the map of global trade. So how big is this shortcut really? On some Asia to Europe routes, going through the Arctic can cut the distance by up to about 40%. A journey that once took 40 to 50 days through the Suez Canal can drop to roughly 20 to 25 days if a ship uses the Arctic instead. For a shipping company, that's huge. It can mean saving millions in fuel over many voyages, fewer days paying crews at sea, and faster delivery for things like electronics, cars, and consumer goods. No wonder some people call it a kind of new Panama Canal at the top of the world. It sounds like the ultimate efficiency hack. But before we crown it the future of global trade, we have to look at what is really happening on the ice and who is actually using this route. Right now, the Northern Sea route along Russia's coast is the main Arctic shortcut being used for serious cargo. Russia controls this corridor and has poured money into Arctic ports, navigation systems, and a powerful fleet of nuclear icebreakers. In recent years, cargo volumes along this route have climbed into the tens of millions of tons, with dozens of foreign-going vessels making seasonal transits. That sounds impressive until you compare it with the Suez Canal, which handles well over 1 billion tons of cargo in a year. The Arctic is still a tiny fraction of global trade. Most of what moves along the Northern Sea route today is not your everyday container ship carrying toys and phones. It's often bulk cargo, like oil, gas, and raw materials, plus a few high-profile test voyages by container ships proving they can make the journey. Even with those limits, some strategists see this as the start of a quiet geo-economic gamble. If Russia and its partners can normalize this route, they gain leverage over a new slice of world trade and over the energy resources surrounding it. What about the Northwest Passage on the Canadian side? Climate change has also made it more navigable in late summer. There are occasional voyages by cargo ships and cruise liners, and stunning photos of vessels gliding through waters that used to be locked in ice. But reality is much messier. Ice conditions can swing wildly from year to year. Dangerous chunks of multi-year ice and roaming icebergs can still drift into narrow straits without much warning. Ports, search and rescue infrastructure, and navigation aids are sparse. For now, the Northwest Passage is more of a symbolic route and a grand adventure than a serious, reliable highway for major container fleets. It may look like a clear line on a map, but for ship owners and insurers, it still looks like a risk. So what makes this shortcut so risky? First, nature has not retired. Even with less ice overall, the remaining ice is more mobile and unpredictable. Wind and currents can suddenly push it into shipping lanes and choke off narrow channels. Arctic storms can build quickly, mixing high waves, freezing spray, and fog. If something goes wrong in that environment, help is far away. There are few deep-water ports, limited Coast Guard and rescue assets, and vast distances between safe harbors. An engine failure or hull breach that might be manageable in a busy region could turn into a full crisis in the high north. International rules known as the Polar Code set extra safety requirements for ships sailing in polar waters, from hull strength to survival gear. That helps, but enforcement and capabilities still vary from country to country and ship to ship. This is not a place where you want to cut corners to save money. Now, here's the bigger environmental plot twist. Ships burning heavy fuel oil in the Arctic release black carbon, basically dark soot that can fall onto snow and ice. When that happens, the ice absorbs more sunlight instead of reflecting it and melts even faster. Analyses of Arctic shipping in recent years have shown that emissions and black carbon from vessels in the region are rising sharply, even while global shipping emissions have grown more slowly. In other words, just as the Arctic becomes more accessible, it's also becoming more stressed by the very ships using it. This creates a vicious loop. Warming melts the ice and opens the route. More shipping pours pollution and black carbon into the region. That speeds up warming and melts more ice, making the shortcut even temptier. The route is both a symptom and a driver of the same problem. Beneath the water, there is another temptation. The Arctic is believed to hold a significant share of the world's undiscovered oil and natural gas, much of it offshore and concentrated in certain coastal regions. There's also growing interest in minerals, fish stocks, and other resources. This is where a softer conspiracy-style idea sometimes appears in debates. Instead of treating Arctic warming as a pure emergency, some governments and companies treat it as a business opening. A warmer Arctic means easier access to oil, gas, and minerals, and easier shipping of those very fuels to market. Is there a single secret master plan? That's unlikely. What the evidence really shows is a set of aligned incentives and opportunistic decisions. Leaders talk about protecting the Arctic, while at the same time approving new energy projects and ship lanes that depend on continued warming. It's not a movie-style conspiracy, but the end result can look disturbingly similar. You might also hear bold claims that the Arctic will replace the Suez Canal and become the new heart of global trade. The numbers tell a calmer story. All Arctic routes combined still handle only a tiny share of the cargo that flows through traditional canals and straits. The Arctic season is short, insurance and icebreaker fees are high, and many big shipping lanes have public climate pledges that make Arctic shortcuts a public relations headache. On top of that, geopolitics matter. Sanctions, tensions around Russia, questions about freedom of navigation, and the rights of indigenous communities all add layers of risk that have nothing to do with ice thickness. For many companies, it's simply not worth it yet. Even so, the rivalry for influence in the far north is real. Russia is positioning itself as the gatekeeper of the Northern Sea route, with icebreakers, bases, and law requiring ships to follow its rules. China calls itself a near-Arctic state and has partnered with Russia on some projects, seeing Arctic shipping as one more way to connect its factories with European markets. The United States, Canada, and Nordic countries worry about security, environmental damage, and the voices of indigenous peoples who depend on the region's ecosystems. Military patrols, scientific stations, and diplomatic summits all reflect the same message. The top of the world is no longer a forgotten white space on the map. It's a strategic arena. So what should we watch in the coming decades? One key signal will be the trend in summer sea ice. If minimum extent keeps shrinking, the window for navigation will grow longer and more attractive for commercial planners. If policies and public pressure slow Arctic shipping or phase out the dirtiest fuels, the economics may shift again. Another signal is whether regular container services announce seasonal Arctic schedules rather than one-off experiments. If that happens, it means major companies and insurers believe the risk is manageable and the profits are worth it. On the other side, a single large oil spill or shipping disaster in the high north could slam the brakes on this entire experiment, triggering bans, lawsuits, and a hard rethink of the idea of an Arctic highway. In the end, how melting Arctic ice is opening this risky new shortcut for global trade comes down to a simple but uncomfortable truth. Climate change has weakened the planet's natural shield at the top of the world, revealing a faster route between continents. That shortcut can save days of travel and tons of fuel on each voyage. But every ship that takes that path sails into a tangle of extreme weather, fragile ecosystems, political tension, and ethical questions. Are we really gaining efficiency, or just shifting the true costs on the climate, Arctic communities, and future generations who never voted for this gamble? The Arctic shortcut is real, it is powerful, and it is not free. It's a bill that may come due long after the last container has been unloaded.